Rapid Strike Urshifu is a deck that has been around in the format for quite a while now. Paired with its partner Inteleon VMAX, these two Rapid Strike Pokemon wreak havoc upon the format, and today I'm going to teach you guys the correct deck list to play, what techs you can play in this deck, and every single matchup that you need to know in this standard Pokemon TCG format. My name is Rahul Reddy. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and if you enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe. It would help out the channel a ton. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Rapid Strike Urshifu is a deck that consists of three Pokemon, three core integral Pokemon. The first of being Inteleon VMAX, which has the Double Gunner ability with 320 HP. As a water type, Double Gunner allows you to discard a water energy from your hand in order to use this ability. Once during your turn, you may put 2 damage counters on 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon, giving you 40 total damage across the board. Now, Inteleon's attack, Gmax Spiral, allows you to do, for a water and colorless, 70 plus 70, and put an energy attached to this Pokemon into your hand. Now, Rapid Strike Energy, coincidentally, is a fighting and water energy requirement and counts for 2, which fulfills the Gmax Spiral attack. Funny, isn't it? With 2 retreat cost, it's pretty easy to move with the energy. Now, the follow-up attacker and partner in crime here is our Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX card with 330 HP. With the attack Gale Thrust, if it moves from the bench to the actives, it's 30 plus 120 this turn. And for a double fighting and colorless Gmax Rapid Flow, you discard all energy from this Pokemon and does 120 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. This deck predicates around sniping, doing a lot of damage, and manipulation of those numbers to get exactly where you need to be to win games. You don't do a lot of damage, but you do enough just to pick off things and win the game. Octillery is the core, the glue, holds the entire deck together as another Rapid Strike Pokemon. Its ability, Rapid Strike Search, is one of the most important cards and abilities in this game, which reads, once during your turn, you may search your deck for a Rapid Strike card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then you shuffle your deck. You can't use more than 1 Rapid Strike ability a turn, so even if you set up 2 Octilleries, you can only search for 1 Rapid Strike card per turn. Now, the attack is irrelevant, but it does have a 2 retreat cost, which every single thing in this deck does. This is a list that I took to 11th place at Gdansk Regionals in Poland. The list is pretty cut and dry. You can see here in a different video where I talk about exactly why I played the certain cards that I did, but I'm going to break it down for you guys just again. 3-3 Inteleon VMAX is our core of the attacking engine because you want to make sure you get at least 2-2 up in a lot of matchups. And the third line is just to make sure we don't prize it, need to get some out early, one gets potentially knocked out, you know, so on and so forth. Urshifu is not really a main attacker in a lot of matchups, but is integral against decks that have the lightning typing because they're weak to fighting. So 1-1 Urshifu usually does the trick because it helps us pull off our combo pieces to close out the game a lot of the time. You don't really need it in a lot of matchups, but against something like Miraidon, you got to get these guys down fast, and these bears are going to do a lot of damage. Octillery, again, is another line where we don't really need to see more than a 1-1 line of it, but you need to get it down quick, and you need to make sure it evolves into Octillery ASAP. Playing 2 Remoraid is more than enough because you want to usually put both down on turn 1, or if you know your opponent can't knock it out, one does just the trick. Squawkabilly can also be played as a Luminian V-Tech in the deck to find your supporters and kind of play the game from there, but Squawkabilly, in my opinion, is much better if you go first or are forced to go first, because a Squawkansy's ability lets you discard and draw 6 brand new cards, which allows you to realistically play a brand new game. You get to basically mulligan away a whole hand. Yes, you have to discard those resources, but it means that if you don't have a good Pokemon in your opening hand, or only one way to get a Pokemon, your hand isn't completely dead. Your turn isn't completely dead because you're just getting a Remoraid and passing. You're banking on a turn 2 Octillery to save you and play the game. But Squawkabilly lets you go find those VIP passes, find those Nest Ball, find Ultra Ball, for a Sealstone to find those cards. Much better, in my opinion. Medicham is another Rapid Strike Pokemon that helps piece our combo together with the Yoga Loop attack. Yoga Loop allows you to place 2 damage counters on the board for a double colorless. And if you knock a Pokemon out this way, you get to take an extra turn. You heard me, that's right, an extra turn. So basically, our whole combo revolves around stealing turns from our opponents and playing more on our own. Who doesn't love to play more Pokemon? Not our opponent. Second attack, Smash Uppercut for fighting double colorless is 100, and the opponent's it's not affected by resistance. Doesn't really do much, but it is damage that you can put onto the board after using Yoga Loop, because he can't use a Yoga Loop 2 turns in a row. Forgot to mention that a little bit. Reddy and Alakazam is the one thing in this deck that's very, very difficult to move because we don't play a switch out. Some players have chosen to opt to play an escape rope to make sure the Radiant Alakazam can get moved, but Alakazam has a really cool ability called Painful Spoons. Once per turn, we can move up to 2 damage counters from one of our opponent's Pokemon to another one of their Pokemon. Now, this helps out with Double Gunner because we can put 40 total damage on the board, but 20 on 2 different Pokemon. With using Painful Spoons, we can move the damage where we want it to be to set up perfectly for Metacham's Yoga Loop ability, Inteleon's attack, or for Rapid Strike Urshifu's Rapid Flow attack to clean up the board. Spirit Tomb is a card that I would play if you are worried about Mew Vmax, which is one of this deck's worst matchups, with the ability Fettered in Misfortune. Basic Pokemon V in play in yours and your opponent's play don't have any abilities. So against Mew Vmax, you just get this guy out and just say, good luck, buddy, let's see you play the game. Now this deck plays an ample amount of supporters. Professor's Research and Iono are your just staple draw cards throughout the game. Corinna's Focus isn't so great even though it fills your hand to 6, but it is a Rapid Strike card, meaning it can be searched by Octillery. So if you have to just go down to a 0-card hand or 1-card hand and sacrifice resources to establish its Octillery, never fear, Corinna's Focus is here. Melanie is a card that combos out with all of your V Pokemon by able to put Water Energy on one of them and drawing 3 cards, as well as just setting up a Urshifu out of nowhere to Rapid Flow, because you can use Melanie and attach a Rapid Strike energy in the same turn to blow up your opponent's board in back-to-back turns. Clara is a crucial card in this deck because you are often playing out of the discard. If you Squawk and Seize away a lot of important cards on turn 1, Clara lets you get them on turn 2, turn 3, whatever turn you need to find them later down the line. Sometimes you might have to discard a Radiant Alakazam or Metacham, but you can combo them back with your Clara later in the game. Professor Turo's scenario allows you to pick up a heavily damaged Pokemon in this situation, or a Squawk ability if it just gets stuck in the active or you don't want on your board. Radiant Alakazam sometimes will also find itself stuck in the active spot, and Professor Turo's scenario lets you pick it up and put it back in your hand. You can use multiple abilities, maybe potentially by putting Turo back in your hand and putting something down, like Alakazam. And then Arven couples really well because there's a couple of really cool tools that we're going to get to in just a second. Ultra Ball, VIP Pass are our consistency cards, as well as Nest Ball. 2 Energy Retrieval plus 2 Vessel are our ways to use and reuse these water energies throughout the game that we want to use. For Double Gunner, as well as finding them for attachments across the board. 2 Forest Seal Stones are pivotal for the deck because you can just find them, put them onto your board, and use them to combo out on a turn where we might need 3, maybe 4 pieces, and 1 can come from Forest Seal Stone, 1 comes from Octillery, and maybe 1 we have to find through a research. Technical Machine Devolution is the new addition to the deck that has been acquired through the Paradox Rift expansion, and basically what this attack does is for a single water energy, or any energy honestly, you can just devolve your opponent's highest evolution Pokemon and put them into their hands. This makes dealing with big decks, big threats, much, much easier. For example, a deck like Charizard is much, much tougher to deal with because your opponent has 330 HP and these are behemoths. But Charmander and Charmeleon don't, so why don't we just deal with those instead? Tower of Waters is our retreat option, as well as a path bump, because Octillery can go ahead and find this card with its ability. Gives all of our Rapid Strike Pokemon 2 less retreat cost. Everything's going out to a retreat. Fun coincidence there, isn't it? Now we have 5 water energies, which we can play off of Earthen Vessel and Energy Retrieval to use Double Gunner, as well as attach to our Urshifu preemptively, or attack with Inteleon VMAX throughout the game. And then our 4 Rapid Strike energy are like Liquid Gold here, because you can power up a Metacham in 1 turn, a Gale Thrust in 1 turn, or use Inteleon's attack in 1 turn. That's the basic core list, and unlike other decks that I've talked about on this channel, Inteleon doesn't really have much wiggle room. Like I mentioned, a couple of cards like Escape Route, Luminion, maybe Irida. You can try these cards out on the list, but pretty much 57 of these cards are pretty much locked every time you play the deck. Fear Factor. These are this deck's worst matchup. If you want to beat Rapid Strike Inteleon sitting down across the table, these 3 decks, well, those will do the job. Roaring Moon, unfortunately, is one of our worst matchups because its Frenzied Gouging attack just knocks out a Pokemon and just does 200 damage back to itself. Now, in most situations, you're like, wow, we can Yoga Loop this. We can move some damage around, get some shenanigans, get frisky with it. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way because Roaring Moon does take 3 prize cards per knockout because we have VMAX Pokemon, and we only take 2, and then we really struggle to do anything to the rest of their board. So if they just get 2 Roaring Moons set up at any point in time, the game is kind of over. Calamity Storm also, with Stadium, one-shots all of the baby V Pokemon, because Inteleon V has 200 and Urshifu V has 220. So even if we choose to play a slower game, Roaring Moon can still just blow up our board much, much quicker than we can actually play the game and combo out. A big problem for this deck. Mew VMAX is one of the few decks that also just punishes us greatly because everything in the deck can one-shot us. Cross Fusion Strike for Technoblast is an attack that just basically pops us almost immediately, and we don't really get to do anything, which sucks. Fusion Strike Mew is a much harder version to beat than Double Turbo, because Double Turbo we have Fettered and Misfortune Spirit Tomb to stifle their draw a little bit, but the Fusion version can use Alessa's Sparkle, put energy onto their board, onto their Genesects, and still bypass that ability and draw some cards. As well as Melodious Echo, if they get 4 into play, doing 280 damage, which is a lot. Block Snorlax is one of our toughest matchups because we get stuck in the active spot. We can't really move. We don't have a lot of attacks that do enough damage to one-shot a Snorlax, and they have counter catches to play around our Urshifu. They're going to use cards like Giacomo to get rid of our energies, our Rapid Strike energies, and once we're out of our Rapid Strike energies, that Mimikyu that's going to be sitting in the active, well, it's going to wreak some havoc on us. You can play a couple cards like Psychic Energy potentially to deal with Snorlax, but it's just really not worth it because they're going to just stick something else in the active, and then it's over. This is the top 10 decks, well, I guess top 20 decks, based on Limitless rankings in this current Paradox Rift format. I'm going to be giving you a guide on how to be playing into the top 10 matchups, what you should do, and how you should play into those. So if you're here for the matchup guide, welcome competitive players. Let's jump right into it. Gardevoir is the #1 most popular deck and #1 most performing deck, and this is a standard staple stock list that I just pulled. Now, Gardevoir players might play Jirachi as well in place of one of these cards, and never fear, we'll deal with that all in one go. One of the best strategies against Gardevoir is to not take a ton of prizes early, as to open up a reversal 9 energy attack on a 3 prizer play, and you can kind of just pepper damage onto the board, maybe take a Ralts early into their Mirage step turn where you just put a bunch of damage counters on their board. So now these Refinement Curlias they've established can't really go into these Shining Arcana Guardies because they already have 40 damage on them, which means they can't just attach a reversal from hand, attach 6 energies from the discard, and all of a sudden, hunky-dory, they're just smacking you for 330. Putting damage preemptively on these Curlias is crucial to stopping their game plan because they have to pivot into something like Cresselia. They have to go into a Scream Tail early maybe to try to take out your artillery. They might have to go into a Zacian if they have that. So those are all really crucial. I would kind of ignore the Manaphy and Jirachi if they get put down early, and in favor of just kind of trying to devolve your opponent's board by putting a ton of damage counters on the board. And just if their board is just left with like a Scream Tail, Greninja, Manaphy, Jirachi, well, like what are they going to do? They can't really play the game. Be aware of Avery and benching your Urshifu too early. You don't really need to bench Urshifu or Medicham super early if you're going to combo out. You can kind of do it all at once. The turn you put down the Medicham and plan on Yoga Looping, if that's your strategy, you can put down the Urshifu on the same turn because you get an extra turn, meaning a whole turn technically has passed in the Pokemon TCG, allowing you to evolve that Urshifu V that you just put down into an Urshifu VMAX. Now, if you want to threaten an early Urshifu with an attachment on turn 1, forcing your opponent to go find that Manaphy, that's completely fine. Just don't evolve it into a 3 prizer because Urshifu is psychic weak. It is just not a good time if you leave it that way. Collapse Stadium is a problem for you to deal with. Just keep in mind, if you're committing all of your damage counters onto something, maybe waiting to knock out something later, just keep in mind your opponent does have access to Collapse Stadium and wipe all that damage you've put onto the board. And same with Turo's scenario. They play both those cards so they can wipe out all the damage you put down all at once. But in the early game when they're Mirage stepping and setting up their board, you want to just be peppering damage as much as possible onto these Curlias. Maybe go 40 on one, 20 on one, and 20 on another with your Inteleon if you can, with Double Gunner, making it just so you don't get one shot on the return on the clapback with Reversal Energy, which is huge. The Gardevoir matchup is pretty cut and dry. Play for Devo. Try not to give them a clean Gardevoir. As simple as that. You should be able to win that matchup pretty easy. Next up is Charizard, the second most popular deck in the format, Charizard EX. Another matchup that I think is incredibly favorable for us. Now, Charizard EX is one of the few decks that revolves around using 4 copies of Rare Candy. You heard me, 4. So these Charmanders are not often going into this Charmeleon. They're often going straight into this Charizard, and these Pidgeys are going straight into a Pidgeot. Now, the one thing that all these have in common is that they have very little HP. Charizard has a lot, but doesn't do a lot of damage, only 180. So in the early game, you might want to take a singular prize somewhere just to kind of stop your opponent from finding infinite resources with something like a Mew, or if they have a Charmander in the active, maybe just stifle their setup a little bit. But you're going to just kind of spread to these Charmanders, to the Charizards, to the Pidgeots, and all in one fell swoop, you're just going to devolve the whole board. Pick it up, pack it up. And if they don't get Manaphy or Jirachi down, you can even Rapid Flow preemptively onto like a Pidgeot, and like the Jirachi, or like Pidgeot into like a Charmander or a Charmeleon. Don't do it to Charizard because it's got the Terra ability. You just can't. Your damage is going to go into the void. Just an FYI. So keep that in mind as you're doing it. They're going to hunt down your Octillery aggressively, so be prepared to play the game without an Octillery as soon as possible. And then besides that, I mean, pretty much just devolve their board. Once you get them, you get them. Like, don't go down to one prize, because if you go down to one prize card remaining, Charizard EX does one-shot your whole board. So just don't make that rookie mistake of giving them the access to 330 damage. Hopefully that makes sense. Charizard's a pretty easy matchup for me. Next up is Giratina. Probably one of our closest and 50-50 matchups across the board, because they have 4 disruption cards, probably 3 in most lists actually, but this is just a list I took. I would assume that one of these disruption cards is cut for a mana fee, but this matchup is a little bit tough because Giratina is a little more resilient, and Star Requiem is an ability that can one-shot our 3 prizers. Now, what you want to do in this matchup specifically is try to hit the Tinas as quickly as possible. Like, if your opponent goes into an Abyss Seeking or not, you just want to smack into it for 150. Maybe try to rapid flow the Tinas if you can, put some pressure in that way. If they put down a mana fee, try to establish some sort of a loop play into the mana fee and take out like a comfy there, but don't go down to 3 prizes super early in the game, because then your opponent can just go counter catcher up something, lost mine your Octillery, Path, Roxanne in the same turn, and then you have no Octillery to bounce Stadium. You are stuck. You have no resources, and some of the cards you just had, like your Rapid Strike Energy, stuff like that, are going to be put back into the deck. So you can also just use 70 with Inteleon VMAX on like a Comfey and leave the energy on in play to have it something to do 140 to Tina. Keep in mind they can switch card the Giratina V once you hit into it, but you can also once again play for it to evolve in this strategy, or you can just hit into a Tina 2 times a lot of the time and it'll do the trick. Things like, they won't put down too many Comfy because they don't want to give you easy access to like taking 4 prizes with Yoga Loop Rapid Flow at some point in time, because 1 Tina V-Star is not going to be enough for them to win the game. They do need to establish 2 at least to win the game, and so they won't give you a ton early, but take whatever you can where you can before you have to go into the Roxanne Path turns. And then from there, it's just a little bit of like how good your board is and how much damage you can do the Tinas, or how much damage has already been taken by these Tinas. And if you get stuck by Path Roxanne, it is what it is. Just make sure you have thinned your deck well enough to get to that point. This deck doesn't typically play Vacuum, so if you can get to a situation where Forest Sealstone can stick on your board and you don't have to use it early game, well, we're cooking. We're living good. Mew Vmax, DTE. We're going to start with this one. A little bit of a tougher matchup, but if you go first, just go get that Spiritomb, slam him onto the board, and just look at your opponent and be like, please tell me you can't play the game. Just as simple as that. Just please tell me you don't got a Judge in your hand. Please tell me you don't have a Path in your hand. I'm going to just smack your active, and we're going to see where we go. You just play a good old-fashioned game of Haymaker at this point, set up your board, and just start smacking for 140 with the Inteleons. If your opponent gets to play the game, it's still fine because that Spiritomb is quite good in this matchup. They typically don't play a copy of Lost City. They can't really deal with it. So even if they get rid of your 1 Spiritomb, you have 2 Claras to bring it back. So just keep those Claras ready at the handy to just keep doing that if they exhaust their resources to find a knockout. A little bit of a straightforward one. Even if you go second, go dig for that tomb, get him into play, make your opponent's life a little bit more miserable, set up your board. You might have to give up 2 prizes early with an Inteleon V or something, but you basically just have to set up 2 Inteleon VMAXs, just hope your opponent can't keep chaining attacks. A nightmare scenario for you is if they establish 2 Mew VMAXs with 2 double turbos, because they can just very easily retreat between the 2, chain attacks, make life difficult for you. But if they don't stick a Path or something, you can get both of those Mews down to 180 damage on them, and then devolve both at the same time, which makes it really difficult for them to procure a 3rd Mew VMAX or set up a 3rd one if you can do that with an Iono in tandem or something like that, because they can't draw cards in the late game. So keep that in mind. Iono is really good against this deck when you have Tomb. Tomb good, basically, is the TLDR here. Fusion Mew, a little bit of a tougher matchup because they have Fusion Strike Energy, which allows Genesect to use Fusion Strike system under Fettered and Misfortune, which is really unfortunate, and they can also copy Melodious Echo for 280 damage if they get to that stage in the game. Now, Fusion Strike Energy being on a Mew VMAX is also really annoying because you can't use Double Gunner there or use Alakazam's ability to move damage onto the Mew VMAX because it negates all effective abilities. So you can't really go for the 180 or the 280 of devolve or whatever. You kind of have to hit into it a bunch of times and then devolve it, or you have to like Yoga Loop it or do something to it at some point. So the matchup is really tough, but you basically, again, get the Tomb, put the onus on your opponent to find the Alessa's Sparkle early, force them to use their Forest Sealstone early, put them in a position where you have to Iono them. If they put 4 Fusion Strike energies across the board on like 3 on Genesect, 1 on Mew. They have very few energy to actually attack during the game. So you just put it in an awkward spot where you're like, okay, I can still play for a Devo. I can still play for a situation where I can make your board awkward, your hand awkward, your life awkward. My stream game against Kai Wainwright is a good example of how I tried to fight myself back into the game. But if they set up perfectly like Kai did, it's near impossible to win the game. So keep that in mind. This is one of our worst matchups besides Roaring Moon. Miraidon has been a deck that's been picking up popularity and steam since its championship win over at the Latin American International Championships, played by Yuho Kalma, and then also JW Krewall taking it to a regional championship win as well. Miraidon being in the finals of a major has been pretty much become commonplace. And the way to beat it, well, we have fighting guys. We have these 2 fighting bears that do a ton of damage. You're almost always giving up the first 2 prizes in this matchup. So just kind of do it, and then you can rapid flow, take out the active Raikou, take out like a Flaffy or something. A lot of the time I won't rapid flow if our opponent has a lightning type Pokemon in the active with a Bravery Charm, because Urshifu's 300 one-shots pretty much everything in that position, and I don't really need to rapid flow immediately, because Mew Vmax, even though it has the psychic typing, can't really one-shot my Urshifu on the crackback, but it can copy rapid flow to take out, put a punch damage on Urshifu and take out my Octillery, which can get a little bit dicey. One thing to keep in mind is that Squawkabilly is a free target for us later in the game. By putting 120 on Squawkabilly and knocking out a Flaffy in the same turn, this Squawkabilly becomes an open Yoga Loop target at some point during the game because we can Painful Spoons. If they put a Mew in the active, we can 150 it with Urshi, or 120 it, sorry, with Resistance, and then move the damage around as we freely choose. Iron Hands is a free knockout, Miraidon's a free knockout. A lot of these things are free knockouts, but just keep in mind that they can still ramp up very quickly and potentially blow you out of the water if you have a little bit of a slow start, because Miraidon is one of the fastest decks in the format, and also it just exists in that capacity. But overall, this should be one of the most favorable matchups for us, where we can just put a lot of pressure on early, get set up, and just use our weakness typing to our advantage. There is a bunch of different versions of Lost Zone that have erupted, so we're going to talk about them one at a time. This is Christian Fontenot's regional winning comfy Sablezard list. One of our most favorable matchups, almost certainly, just because everything in this deck is so small. We don't have to take early prizes to proc Radiant Charizard. We know that the pressure points are the Jirachi and the Manaphy, so a lot of the time their board is going to be limited to like Jirachi, Manaphy, a couple of Comfeys, maybe a Cram or a Sableye. So you don't have to take early prizes, maybe one at a time with on the Comfeys. But in the meantime, you want to be putting as much pressure as possible on the board with your double gunners. You want to be putting a ton of damage onto these Manaphy's, these Jirachis. Set up the board to try to take 4 or 5 prizes all at one time, so by the time your opponent can actually use this Radiant Zard effectively, they can't do anything. By the time they want to go into this Roxanne, they can't do anything with it. So you want to just not take a bunch of reckless prizes, but if you have a turn to maybe pass with the Remoraid active and just give them 1 prize, just give it to them in favor of just doing something like triple double gunnering or double gunnering in the same turn, and using something like Clara to set it up again in the following turn, because they're not going to disrupt your hand until you get the Roxanne. So at some point, their board is going to be overflooded with damage that they can't stop, because at some point you're going to take out the Jirachi, and then you're going to be able to use Yoga Loop on something like Manaphy, and then go into something like Rapid Flow. So you can set up 4 to 5 prizes all in one turn, and I did this against a player in Gdansk where you can take all 6 in one turn. They do have Techno Machine Devo, so do keep that in mind as they're peppering damage onto your board with either Sableye or Cramorant. So keep in mind that they can also do the same strategy that you've been doing against other decks to take out your board. So you can use your Professor Turo for great effect in this matchup as well. But the big thing, again, to keep in mind is just the fact that you don't have to take early prizes. Their deck is really slow and they can't hand disrupt, is the big thing. Against this new version of non-Sableye Lost Box, kind of like a toolbox Lost Box deck, they have Moon, which is a little bit annoying to play into, but they also have a board of a bunch of Comfies. And this version doesn't play Manaphy or Jirachi, so you can kind of just pepper a bunch of damage into the board, kind of take out their Comfies, make a ton of pressure early. They don't have any hand disruption at all, so you can kind of just play to rapid flow their board, Yoga Loop their board. If one Roaring Moon comes out, it becomes a very easy Yoga Loop target for us, so you can save your pieces for that at some point in time. You know there's no pressure point to take out your Octillery much faster than other decks, so that's one really good thing for you as well. Raikou and Iron Hands is something to keep in mind when you're setting up your multiple pools of Inteleon, because if you leave an Inteleon in the active recklessly, an Inteleon VMAX, they could just come up and crack back you with like Arm Press or Lightning Rondo for a knockout, and then you're down 3 prizes all of a sudden. So keep in mind that you want to leave suboptimal things in the active spot while you're spreading damage and just setting up your board to blow their board up all at once. They do have a little more pressure than other versions just because they have these big, beefy attackers, but they're still just as susceptible to Rapid Flow or Yoga looping their whole board, especially when they have no comfies to work off of. Now, the more traditional Tord build that's kind of erupted is this Comfy, Tina, Sableye, Cram, Iron Hands, Moon, Hub, the mumbo jumbo of stuff. And this one also has a pressure point where you can just kind of pick off their board slow and steady. They don't have Manaphy, they don't have Jirachi. You can just put them on a lot of pressure early. They're going to kind of try to turbo out on you. They have a Tina to use Star Requiem at some point in time. But again, you also have a whole deck that just picks off all their small guys, and they need their small guys to function. And while Roaring Moon and Iron Hands, two of their big guys, just don't really do too much against your deck. So if they can get a Roaring Moon established on the same turn, they have Tina ready to go with Star Requiem on the following turn, then it's a little bit scary. But even then, you could probably Yoga Loop the active using cards like Alakazam, and then put yourself in a position where you can just win in a couple turns. Because now Metacham's in the active, whatever they give you, you can crack it for 100. And you can just spread a bunch of damage in the same turn. And Iono really, really stifles this deck. Like our two Ionos are really, really good against all of these Lost Box matchups. Next up, Block Lax. Look at this list. Look at all the cards in it. Doesn't matter. You play this matchup, you're going to be looking at these cards for a really long time. Can't really do much. You just go get Tomb. You get Tomb, Octillery, one Inteleon VMAX, and a Baby Rapid Strike Urshifu V. Baby Rapid Strike Urshifu V does 150. One-shots Laxes. Inteleon can attack with its second attack, or its one attack, sorry. And you can Melanie to it, which is a pretty good target. Octillery is a great attacker and a Mimikyu if they set that up. And 2 makes it so they can't use Rotom to draw cards. So you kind of hope their 7 cards in opening hand suck, and your 7 cards are pretty good. And you just pray. You just kind of have to pray that, like, they don't get to play the game, and you get to play the game. And if they get to play the game, you probably lose the game. Pretty unfortunate. It is what it is. They have Giacomo. They have Sydney. They got Charms. Some of us have Capes. This guy's got Hammers. I don't know what this guy's cooking, but he's cooking something. But there is a bunch of cards that just make your life miserable. And if you lose game 1, you can give yourself like a good 5 minutes to try game 2. But I would just pack it up and go for an early launch break if they set up. Now this matchup is actually a little bit tricky. Entei Iron Valiant, second place finisher at LAIC, played by Noya Sawyer. This deck is a little bit tricky just because they're going to opt to go second. They're going to try to Yoga Loop your Remoraid, leave you with nothing on the board, and then try to pop one of your 200 or 220 HP actives, which they can do with relative ease. So they'll take the first 3 prizes pretty quickly, and that's where the game kind of begins for you. Now, your turn 1 setup is going to be pretty pivotal because at this point, if your turn 1 setup is weak, then maybe you just lost the game because now you have no Octillery to work off of. You just lost an Urshifu or you lost an Inteleon. They have an Entei sitting in the active spot that's a little bit threatening. Sure, all you need is VMAX and Rapid Strike Energy to one-shot this Entei, but how easy is it for you to find? That's basically what the matchup comes down to. If you can get past this turn and actually set up your board with like 3 prizers and just pop them, and maybe Iono on the same turn, you're cooking. Their deck just kind of stops working at that point because if you're catting with me, there's all these cards dedicated to turn 1, and then once turn 1 passes, a lot of these cards are completely dead. So if they go for if they get to 3 prizes down on turn 1 while looping your board, if you get 2 Remraids down, you're also probably chilling because they need a lot of switch effects to make sure they can pop both of them in one turn, even with Yoga Loop. So you're probably okay. But yeah, this matchup is survive the early turns and then Iono them as soon as possible, and then keep Ionoing them, and then just take 2/2/2 if you can. And it's winnable. You have Turo's scenario to pick up something that's super damaged. You kind of just pivot between your guys. Just don't give them too much agency for Entei's damage to do a ton if you can, possibly. But obviously sometimes I know that is very difficult to do off your early rip. Chien-Pao Excalibur is a deck that also requires talking about, even though it has not placed very well recently in tournaments. It is still a deck that exists. Chien-Pao is going to come at you, and it's going to come at you hard. It's one of the few decks that can one-shot your 3 prizers in the format. They either play Cross Switcher or Counter Catcher. Now, if they're playing Counter Catcher, Bundle, and Rope, life is so much easier because you can give them small guys to just one-shot. Take my Alakazam, take my Remoraid, who cares? But if they're playing Cross Switchers, it gets a little bit more difficult because they can chase down your 3 prizers for great effect and just take a bunch of prizes. They can amp you very much on an Inteleon V or a Squawkabilly, which makes the game really, really, really scary. Now, that being said, one of the big things you want to do is just basically devolve their board, take out their Frigibaxes as soon as possible. Just go for the throat, go for the the core of the engine, which is the Baxcalibur engine. Just take that out as soon as possible, and then spam those Ionos. Even if they have the barrels up and running, you can devolve those down the line. But as long as they don't have any Baxcaliburs, they just don't get to play the game. So if you can just like pick off these Virtuabaxes pretty quickly with Double Gunner, Yoga Loop, whatever, their life gets much more difficult. So that's kind of what you want to do more than anything. And I think it's pretty relatively straightforward, especially because you have the Devo tool and they don't play anything besides Candy. So it's pretty easy to just pepper those 60 damage with 70 damage and devolve their board. Now that is all of Urshifu's top 10 matchups to deal with. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this Rapid Strike Inteleon VMAX Urshifu guide. If you guys like the sound stuff, please leave that comment and like below, subscribe. Sorry I started over my words at the very end there, but I appreciate you guys all for watching. Thank you so much, and until next time.